You're listening ad-free on Amazon Music.
One Monday morning in May of 2010, a classroom full of sixth graders sat at their desks waiting for their substitute teacher to arrive. But the morning bell rang, and the substitute never showed. As it happened, a school administrator walked past that classroom and noticed all the kids just kind of standing around with no teacher in the classroom, and so the administrator rushed to the front office to figure out what was going on. The substitute that was supposed to be in that class had always been so reliable, and so it was not like her to just not show up for work. And so the administrator tried calling the substitute teacher, but after she didn't answer, the administrator called the substitute's son. And the son went over to his mother's house to see if she was okay, and he would find his mother sitting at her computer. But right away, he could tell something was horribly wrong. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right podcast because that's all we do, and we upload twice a week, once on Monday and once on Thursday. So if that's of interest to you, kindly offer to help the follow button patch up their leaking roof. But once the follow button climbs upon the roof expecting you to follow, don't follow and just take the ladder and leave. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the morning of Friday, May 21st, 2010, 68-year-old Dennis Kola sat down for breakfast with his wife Myrna inside of their kitchen in their spacious four-bedroom house in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Dennis picked up the newspaper and, like always, began reading the front page out loud to Myrna. This was an activity the couple enjoyed doing together every morning. According to the story on the front page, the stock market was struggling and unemployment was on the rise. But Myrna didn't bat an eye. She knew that she and Dennis would be fine because they had made a ton of money throughout their 42-year marriage by owning multiple successful businesses, from a chain of pharmacies to a Ford car dealership that Dennis owned with his son. But a few years earlier, Dennis had seen the writing on the wall when it came to the country's economy. So he had sold his businesses before things got too bad, and he had walked away with enough money for him and Myrna to be set for the rest of their lives without having to work. But the truth was, Dennis and Myrna actually loved to work, kind of independent of making money, so they weren't quite ready to just full-on retire. And so after selling his companies, Dennis had returned to his old job as a pharmacist, and Myrna worked at a local middle school as a substitute teacher. And so on this Friday morning, because of his work commitments, Dennis didn't have time to read beyond just the first few pages of the newspaper. After putting the paper down, Dennis finished his breakfast, then gave his wife a kiss on the cheek and told her he loved her, and then he walked out the front door. Once outside, Dennis climbed into his truck and began the 40-mile drive to the nearby town where he worked at this local pharmacy. And while Dennis made his commute, Myrna cleaned up the kitchen and then headed out to work herself. And as she drove the short distance to West Salem Middle School, she passed by all these mini mansions that were just like hers, with wide, well-manicured lawns, and then she drove by the neighborhood golf course and banquet hall. Myrna couldn't picture a better place for her and Dennis to grow old together, a small community filled with friends where she always felt comfortable and safe. And she loved how close her neighborhood was to the rest of her family. Dennis and Myrna had 2 grown children who also had children of their own, and Myrna thought there was nothing better than having the family over and spending time with the grandkids she adored. Myrna finally arrived at the middle school, and she went inside and walked down a long hall to the classroom where she had been assigned that day. She opened the door, and the faces of the students lit up. Myrna was the kids' favorite substitute teacher. The school day passed quickly for Myrna, and as always, she made each period pass just as quickly for her students by making sure the lessons were actually fun. Myrna had always believed that learning should be an enjoyable experience and not a slog where every minute feels like an hour. Myrna worked that day at the school until around 3 p.m., and then the final bell rang and she told her class to have a great weekend, and she said she'd be back as their substitute on Monday. Then Myrna headed outside, hopped in her car, and made her way home, and then once there, she did some chores around the house, and when she was done with her housework, she sat down in the home office and logged onto her computer. About 45 minutes later, around 6 p.m., her husband, Dennis, pulled back up to the house after his day of work. He parked his truck and made his way onto the porch, eager to get inside and have dinner with his wife. Dennis opened the door and walked through the hallway toward the kitchen, his keys dangling from his hand, and then Dennis stepped into the kitchen and called out to his wife. And then suddenly, everything went black. 3 days later, on Monday at 7:50 a.m., the morning bell rang at West Salem Middle School, marking the beginning of the official day. Students all took their seats in all the classrooms, and the school kind of went quiet as the teachers began their lessons. That is, in every classroom but one. In that one classroom, the chair behind the teacher's desk remained empty, and so the students in that classroom just remained standing up and chatting with each other, aware of the fact that their teacher was not there, but not that worried because they liked having some extra time. However, these students' obvious restlessness caught the ear of an administrator who happened to be walking by the classroom. And the administrator stepped into the room and asked what was going on, and the students said their substitute teacher still hadn't shown up. Concerned, the administrator told the students to wait quietly, and then he returned to the front office to double-check the schedule. This was the class that Myrna Cola had been assigned to teach that week, and apparently she had just not shown up for work and didn't tell anybody. The administrator pulled up Myrna's file and dialed her phone number, but no one answered. So the administrator checked Myrna's emergency contact info, and he found it was her son, Eric. Eric Cola was home with his wife when he got the phone call from the administrator. Eric told the administrator that he had no idea why his mom wouldn't show up for work, but he told him he'd try to get in touch with her and report back as soon as he could. Eric hung up and dialed his mom's cell phone, but it just rang and rang until it went to voicemail. So Eric called his father, who at this point in the morning would have been in his truck on his way to work, and so in theory would have been ready to receive a phone call, but he too did not answer his phone. After both parents didn't pick up, Eric turned to his wife looking concerned and said something wasn't right, that this was totally out of character for his parents to just go completely incommunicado. And so Eric called his sister, Cindy, and asked her if she had had any contact with their parents, but Cindy said that she hadn't talked to them since before the weekend. After Eric ended this call, he told his wife that he was just going to go to his parents' house to see what the heck was going on. And about 10 minutes later, Eric slowed his truck to a stop in front of the house, and he saw his dad's truck was out front. Eric parked, walked up the driveway to the side of the house, and he looked into his parents' 3-car garage, and he could see his mother's car, a Mountaineer, was also parked inside, so his parents had to be home. Eric opened the garage with the opener his parents had given him, he walked past his mother's SUV, and then he opened the unlocked door to the house and stepped inside. And as he walked towards the kitchen, he saw his father. Dennis was lying there, motionless on the kitchen floor. Eric ran to his father, and he saw there was a pool of blood all around him. Eric got down on the floor and grabbed his dad's leg, desperately trying to shake him awake. But not only was Dennis unresponsive, his body was totally stiff. And so in a panic, Eric grabbed his phone and dialed 911, and when the operator answered, he told them as best as he could what he had seen, and the operator, who was very calm, asked Eric if anyone else was in the house. And so Eric, who didn't know, began walking down the hall, and when he looked into the office, he cried out. There was his mother, slumped over the desk at the computer. Her skin had turned purple. The operator calmly asked Eric if his mother was still breathing, and Eric replied that no, she wasn't, that both of his parents had to be dead. A little while after Eric's 911 call, Agent John Christopherson of the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation and members of his team arrived at the Cola's house. Christopherson saw 2 deputies from the La Crosse County Sheriff's Department talking to Eric in the front yard. And he saw several of the Cola's neighbors standing on their porches, looking completely stunned by all the police activity. I mean, this stuff didn't happen in this neighborhood. Christopherson knew major crime was rare in this community, and a double homicide was basically unheard of. That was a big reason Christopherson and the state police had been brought in to lead this investigation. Agent Christopherson got out of his car, walked across the yard, and introduced himself to the deputies and to Eric. And he let them both know that he'd be back soon to ask some questions. Then he led members of his team into the Cola's house. The smell of decomposing bodies hit them immediately, and the smell instantly told them that the victims must have been dead for quite a while. Christopherson walked to the kitchen, and he saw Dennis lying face down on the floor. Dennis was surrounded by a pool of coagulated blood, and he had a hole in the right side of his head. Dennis was still wearing his jacket, and his car keys were clutched tightly in his hand. So Christopherson figured that Dennis must have been shot shortly after he walked through the front door of his house. After looking around the kitchen, Christopherson walked down the hall to the office, where he knew the second victim had been found. He saw Myrna's body hunched over the desk. She had an obvious bullet wound in the back of her head, and her left arm was resting on the computer keyboard, as if she had been typing when someone walked up behind her and shot her. Christopherson turned around and glanced back at the office door. He wondered if the killer had stood there and watched this woman at her computer before shooting her. there was something cold-blooded about the idea, like a predator observing its prey before moving in for the kill. While Christofferson searched the office, a member of the investigative team walked inside and told Christofferson that he needed to see something upstairs. So Christofferson followed the officer up a carpeted staircase, down a hallway, and into Myrna and Dennis's bedroom. It appeared like the room had been ransacked. All of the dresser drawers had been pulled open, but as Christofferson walked across the room to the dresser, he felt like there was something unusual about the bedroom scene. Their dresser drawers had all been pulled out and left open in a way that a robber wouldn't have actually been able to see what was in each drawer, and it didn't look like anyone had actually dug through the drawers or taken anything. So Christofferson wondered if maybe the killer had tried to stage the room to look like a robbery, even though that's not what it was. Christofferson continued to walk around the room, and he quickly found pieces of Myrna's very expensive jewelry just sitting out, untouched, so that only added to his suspicion that the apparent ransacking in the bedroom really had been staged. Christofferson finished searching the room and then made his way down the hall to an upstairs guest room. This room looked untouched. But then, when he opened the door to a walk-in closet inside of this room, something immediately caught the agent's eye. It was a .22 caliber rifle propped up against the wall. Christofferson looked up, and he saw, on a shelf right above the rifle, was an opened box of ammunition. He kneeled down to look closer at the rifle, and he noticed there was an indentation in the carpet nearby that was about the same size and shape as the butt of the gun. It looked like the indentation was where the rifle had been resting, but then just recently, someone must have moved that rifle, and when they returned it, they didn't put it back exactly where they'd found it, in the indentation. Christofferson had a member of his team bag the rifle and the box of ammunition and book them into evidence. Then Christofferson headed downstairs and outside and joined the deputies who were talking to Eric. After telling Eric how sorry he was for his loss, Christofferson said, "Look, I have to ask you right now about what you know, because this is a murder investigation and this needs to move quickly." And so he asked Eric when was the last time he saw his parents alive. Eric said it had been Thursday night, so 4 nights earlier. He had stopped by the house to help his mother do laundry and to help his father replace some boards out on the deck. And before Eric left, Eric told Christofferson that his father had said to him, "I love you, son." And Eric had said back, "Yeah, I love you too, Dad." He said that was the last time they actually spoke. Eric did tell Christofferson that that weekend he had tried calling his parents to invite them to a cookout, but they didn't pick up, so he left a voicemail, and his parents didn't call him back, but he didn't think it was that big of a deal because he knew his parents had plans with friends that weekend. After hearing this, Christofferson asked Eric if he knew of anyone who might have access to his parents' residence. Eric said he couldn't think of anyone specifically, but he did say his parents often kept their doors unlocked. This didn't really surprise Christofferson because that's how safe this community was. But now he wondered if maybe someone had exploited that sense of security and just slipped inside the house through an unlocked door. As Eric continued to speak with Christofferson and the other police officers, Eric's sister, Cindy Cowell, arrived at the property. And as she walked across the yard towards them, Christofferson could tell she'd been crying. After Cindy walked over to them, she gave her brother a hug, and the two of them did their best to comfort each other and also to provide any additional information that might help. But neither of them could think of anyone who might have had a motive to kill their parents. And so this double murder was turning into a total mystery. The next day, the medical examiner performed autopsies on Dennis and Myrna, and the results were far from surprising. Each had been shot in the head. But there was an important detail. The bullet that had struck them in the head was a .22 caliber bullet. And this was an important detail for Christofferson because it was the same caliber bullet used in the rifle he'd found in the upstairs bedroom closet. And that rifle had clearly been recently moved because of that indentation he saw in the carpet. And Christofferson thought that if that rifle was the murder weapon, then the killer had to have known Dennis and Myrna well enough to know where they kept that gun. Christofferson wanted to develop a timeline of the Cola's last day. However, the autopsies did not pinpoint the exact times of their deaths, so he still wasn't even sure what day they had died. But one thing he did know was that Myrna had clearly been using her computer when she was killed, so his team sent Myrna's computer to a forensic data lab where the hard drive could be analyzed for timestamps. And this data revealed that Myrna had begun using her computer at exactly 5:14 p.m. on Friday, May 21st, and her very last keystroke was made at 5:41 p.m. that same evening. And so Christofferson believed that 5:41 p.m. on May 21st was the exact time of Myrna's death. Then Christofferson, using this information, figured out when Dennis had left work on that day and how long generally it would take Dennis to drive back home. And based on this, Christofferson concluded that Dennis most likely got home around 6 p.m. So he estimated that Dennis's time of death was about 20 minutes after his wife's death. So at this point, Christofferson knew that the Colas had very likely been killed in the early evening of May 21st, 3 days before they were actually discovered. And also, based on the timeline, whoever had shot Myrna had very likely waited inside of the house to then kill Dennis when he walked inside. Christofferson knew that Dennis and Myrna were well off financially, and they had multiple investments and life insurance policies with very big payouts, so money had to be considered as a potential motive. And investigators soon learned that the beneficiaries of Dennis and Myrna's life insurance policies were their kids, Eric and Cindy, and they stood to inherit over $700,000 each. And so obviously, when you include the fact that Eric was the one who found the bodies, this made the kids highly suspicious. And so Christofferson decided he would speak to them both, but he would start with Eric. And so the day after the discovery of the bodies, Eric arrived at the police station and he sat down across from Christofferson inside of a small interview room. And Eric appeared to be very grief-stricken, but at the same time, Christofferson could tell Eric was eager to help. He spoke in a cooperative tone and never came across as defensive. And so the first question Christofferson asked Eric was, how was his relationship with his parents? Eric said he had always gotten along with both of his parents. He said his father was a great business partner because they worked at that car dealership together, and also they played golf together all the time. Eric said he also made a point to see his mother as much as he could and also help her out around the house because she refused to slow down even though she was almost 70. After that, Christofferson asked Eric to walk him through what he did all day on Friday, May 21st, which is again the day that Christofferson believed the two victims were killed. Eric said that day he spent the morning and afternoon doing what he normally did, day trading. Day trading is a form of securities trading where the trader buys stocks and other assets and then sells them the same day, taking advantage of price fluctuations that occur between the opening and closing of the trading day. And Eric would say he was actually a pretty successful day trader, often pulling in between $7,000 and $10,000 a month. The only downside being that it required him to sit at home on his computer for hours and hours on end. After he finally got up from his computer, he left his house to meet up with his friend to help grout and tile a shower. He said he was with that friend until about 5:30 p.m., and then he went to pick up his wife at home because they were going out to celebrate their 16th wedding anniversary. Now, to this point in the interview, it was very cut and dry. Eric is doing his best to be composed, but at this point, Eric just suddenly shook his head and began laughing. Christofferson was very surprised at this and asked, did I miss something funny? Eric stopped laughing and said, it's not really funny, but I had known about this day, our anniversary, for a long time. We had planned it all out, but as I was going back home that day, I actually realized I totally forgot to buy an actual anniversary gift. And so Eric would explain that he stopped at a retail store called Shopko to buy his wife a hanging plant because he knew his wife loved hanging plants, and he also knew the exact type to get her. And so Eric said he went inside the shop and he browsed the store's garden center for a while, but he didn't actually see the plant that his wife liked. So he drove to a different Shopko location and he did find the right hanging plant there. And he paid for it and then drove home, and then he and his wife had gone out for their celebration. And then right after he said that, Eric looked like he had just remembered something out of the blue. And he pulled his wallet out and he took out a receipt for this plant and he slid it across the table to Christofferson, saying that he had held on to this receipt in case his wife didn't like the plant and so she could return it. Christofferson looked at the receipt and it did confirm that Eric had bought this plant at 6:15 p.m. at the Shopko. After that, Christofferson asked Eric to wait in the interview room while he reached out to Eric's friend to confirm that they really had met up on that Friday to grout and tile the bathroom. And so Christofferson got the friend's number, stepped into the hall, and gave him a call, and the friend confirmed that Eric had left his house around 5:30 that evening. And so at this point, Christofferson concluded that based on Eric's timeline, he didn't really have enough time to have also driven to his parents' house to kill them, between leaving his friend's house and then getting that plant at Shopko. So Christofferson did not think Eric was as likely of a suspect as he originally seemed. So Christofferson walked back into the interview room and asked Eric if he could think of anyone at all, who may have had a reason to harm his parents. Eric hesitated, and then with obvious reluctance in his voice, he said they should look into his sister, Cindy, and her husband, Patrick. When asked to explain why, Eric said that Cindy had been having some very serious financial problems. She was living paycheck to paycheck, earning close to minimum wage, working for a collections agency. Meanwhile, her husband, Patrick, didn't work at all. They had a mortgage and other expenses, and Cindy had been borrowing money from their parents to help make ends meet. In fact, she actually owed her parents tens of thousands of dollars. And then also, Eric said that his sister's husband, Patrick, was just generally kind of a bad guy. And also, Eric knew his parents did not like Patrick at all and often referred to him as a, quote, lazy bum. But Eric said he wasn't sure if his parents even knew just how bad things really were between Cindy and her husband, Patrick. Eric said Patrick had a violent temper and had once pulled a gun on Cindy after she threatened to leave him. Patrick allegedly told Cindy that the only way she'd be leaving him was in a body bag. Christofferson was shocked at this information. I mean, if this was true, this was a huge red flag. I mean, the idea that Patrick had literally pulled a gun out and actually threatened to kill someone certainly made him a pretty big suspect. But Christofferson kind of tempered his reaction to this and just thanked Eric for coming in and speaking to him. And then after Eric was gone, Christofferson immediately reached out to Cindy to set up a meeting. The following day, Cindy showed up at the station and joined Christofferson in the interview room. And right away, Christofferson could tell Cindy seemed very rattled and sort of nervous. But Christofferson didn't react to that and just thanked her for coming in and reiterated how sorry he was for her loss. His voice was calm and friendly, and he told Cindy there was no reason to be nervous, this was just an interview, not an interrogation. Cindy nodded, but still seemed very nervous. Christofferson began the interview by asking Cindy when was the last time she spoke to her parents, and Cindy said she had spoken to her father on Friday morning, so the day that Dennis and Myrna were killed. Cindy said during this conversation with her dad, she had talked about her and her husband's mounting financial troubles. She had told her father that she and Patrick had absolutely no money, and to make matters worse, the unemployment check that Patrick was expecting hadn't arrived yet. Cindy said her father had been sort of blunt with her that morning. He criticized her husband for not supporting her and their daughter, and then he told Cindy he would not keep giving her any more money. Cindy looked like she was about to cry. She told Christofferson that her father's rejection was so upsetting for her, and she felt like Eric was the favorite child, the golden boy, while she was just a disappointment to her parents. After that, Christofferson asked her what she had done the rest of that day after she had spoken to her father. Cindy said she'd been at work until about 4:45 p.m. She left the office and stopped at a convenience store to buy some groceries, and then she got home between 5:30 and 6. And once she was home, she spent the rest of the evening with her daughter and husband. Christofferson took down Cindy's work information and said that was all he needed from her for now, and that he would follow up if necessary. After the interview, members of the investigative team went to Cindy's office and obtained her punch cards. And the punch cards would show that yes, Cindy had clocked out at 4:45 p.m. Next, they drove over to the convenience store where Cindy said she had done her grocery shopping, and the manager of that store gave them access to the surveillance footage from that day, and it didn't take investigators long to find Cindy in the video shopping in the store during the time frame she said she was. And so, just like with her brother, the investigators concluded that basically based on the timeline, there wasn't enough time for Cindy to have gone to her parents' house and killed them. But Agent Christofferson couldn't completely rule Cindy out yet. Even if she wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, what's to say her husband, Patrick, the man who apparently had, a temper and had previously drawn a gun on Cindy and threatened her life, who's to say he didn't pull the trigger? And also maybe Cindy was involved somehow with the murder, that she helped coordinate it for Patrick. But before Christofferson jumped to that conclusion and brought Patrick in and really drilled him hard on what he was doing on that day, he first wanted to check to see if Eric's description of Patrick was actually accurate. And what Christofferson learned was Patrick had apparently cheated on Cindy at some point, he abused drugs, and he had difficulty holding down jobs, and because he was currently unemployed, he had a lot of free time and not a lot of money. Christofferson also learned that Myrna did not like Patrick so much that she had warned Cindy that if she stayed married to Patrick, there's a chance that she would just deny her getting her inheritance, that basically Patrick could not touch this money, and that was the reason she wouldn't be getting it. And Patrick was definitely aware of this, and also he was aware that Cindy's parents were apparently about to cut them both off financially. And so it did seem like Patrick had more motive to want Dennis and Myrna dead than anybody else. A few days after the murders, Christofferson, along with an investigator from the sheriff's department, waited for Patrick inside of an interview room. Eventually, another officer led Patrick into the room, and Patrick sat down on the other side of the table. Patrick was very physically imposing. He was tall with broad shoulders, and he had short cropped hair, and he had spent some time in the Marine Corps. But once he was settled in his seat, he made it very clear that he wanted to help the investigators in any way he could. And the investigators actually couldn't help but look at each other really quickly, like they couldn't believe how soft-spoken Patrick seemed. I mean, this guy had this horrible reputation, and right now, he seemed like he was just very cooperative. But Christofferson knew looks can be deceiving, so he got right to the point. And he asked Patrick how he spent his day on Friday, May 21st, the day his in-laws were killed. And Patrick said in a very soft voice that he had spent the day just kind of hanging around the house by himself, watching TV and playing Xbox. After this, the county investigators said to Patrick, that's not exactly an airtight alibi. If he was home by himself, how could anybody corroborate that? Patrick said he understood, but he really was telling the truth. That's what he did on Friday. And then he also said he always had a great relationship with Dennis and Myrna, and he would never do anything to hurt them or to cause his wife any pain. At this point, Christofferson was nearly certain that Patrick was just lying, because basically everyone they had spoken to had said that the in-laws did not get along with Patrick. They called him the lazy bum, and they totally resented him and did not like him. So how could he possibly have a good relationship with them? And so Christofferson didn't waste any time. He leaned in and told Patrick that police had heard his relationship with the victims had been strained, to say the least, and so it seemed very likely that right now, Patrick was lying. Christofferson also pointed out Patrick's weak alibi and the fact that as a former Marine, he would know how to use a gun. Patrick didn't deny any of this and said he did own several firearms, but he said again that he really had been at home playing video games that past Friday, and he really didn't have anything to do with the murders. Christofferson told Patrick that they might have a better idea if he really was telling the truth if he allowed them to search his house. Patrick looked at both investigators, and his voice stayed calm and soft like it had the whole time, and he said yes, he would consent to a search of his home because he had nothing to hide. So not long after this interview, investigators did search Patrick and Cindy's house, and they would find multiple firearms which were confiscated. They also seized Patrick's Xbox and brought it into the crime lab for analysis. Investigators were able to see exactly when the Xbox game console was being used, and it did seem to confirm everything Patrick had said, because the Xbox had been used all day on Friday, suggesting Patrick really had been at home playing video games at the time Myrna and Dennis were murdered. And also, after closer analysis, the guns seized in Patrick and Cindy's house were not the same ones that fired the .22 caliber bullets that killed Dennis and Myrna. And so, just like Eric and Cindy, Patrick suddenly had a solid alibi. The following day, Eric walked outside of his house, he opened up his mailbox, and he found a single item inside. It was a plain white envelope with no postage on it. Eric took the envelope inside of his house, he opened it up, and he looked at the paper that was inside. And when Eric saw what was on it, his face turned pale and he started breathing heavily. His wife walked into the room and saw Eric staring at this note and clenching his jaw and shaking his head, and she asked him, "What's going on? What does the note say?" Eric walked over to his wife and just held the note out for her to read. And in strange, weirdly stilted handwriting were the words, "Fixed you." That's all it said, "Fixed you." Eric's wife immediately picked up her phone and dialed 911. A few minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the house and took this strange note into evidence. And also the deputy noticed that Eric was incredibly rattled and could barely talk. In fact, the sheriff's deputy said it seemed like Eric could actually have a heart attack. And as Eric tried to catch his breath, he would tell the deputy that he believed his parents' killer wrote this note, and somehow those two words, "fixed you," meant they were coming for him and his family next. The note forced Christofferson to view this case from a totally new angle. If somebody really did have a vendetta against the Colas, and that's why they killed Dennis and Myrna, it did seem entirely possible that they might also target the rest of the Cola family. And so that possibility obviously put way more pressure on Christofferson and his team to solve this case quickly. But the only thing that Christofferson kept coming back to that just seemed like it had to be at the heart of this case was money. Not only did Dennis and Myrna have property, investments, and huge insurance policies before they died, but also Eric had been a successful day trader and had lots of money too. So Christofferson decided he would dig deep as he could into the family's finances, hoping that might point him to a potential killer. And so back at the station, Christofferson and a forensic accountant dug through stacks of Dennis and Myrna's printed bank statements, and also they reviewed the couple's most recent online banking transactions. And as they looked at that recent online activity, something absolutely shocked them. And at first, Christofferson literally couldn't believe what he was looking at, like this had to be a mistake, because it was something so outlandish, it just shouldn't have been there. There was a transaction made on May 22nd, 2010, the day after the murders. The transaction showed a check that was cashed from Dennis's account for $50,000. Now, the name on the signature line of the check was Dennis Cola, but it was the name on the account that this check had been deposited into that really caught the investigators' attention. And suddenly, the whole focus of the investigation shifted. Police immediately served a search warrant on this particular person's house, and inside they found a pair of plain white envelopes very similar to the envelope that Eric had found in his mailbox that contained the words "fixed you" on it. And when those envelopes were compared to the one that Eric had received, they contained the same manufacturing defect, proving that the envelope containing that "fixed you" note had come from this individual's house. Then a forensic document examiner looked at that $50,000 check, and he quickly determined that Dennis's signature on this check was a forgery. What's more, the forged handwriting perfectly matched the handwriting on the "fixed you" note. And so now Agent Christofferson was very confident that the person who wrote that note and then also forged the check was Dennis and Myrna's killer. Based on financial records, evidence from the crime scene, and interviews conducted throughout the investigation, here is what police believe happened to Dennis and Myrna Cola on May 21st, 2010. Around 5:30 p.m., the killer, who was inside of the Cola's house at this point, slowly walked down the hallway in the direction of the home office. They watched Myrna from the hall until they were sure she was totally preoccupied with what she was doing on her computer. Then the killer slowly walked upstairs, entered one of the bedrooms, opened the closet door, and lifted the .22 caliber rifle from where it was resting on the floor. They also reached up and grabbed some ammo from the box on the shelf, then loaded the rifle and walked back downstairs. Then the killer made their way back to the home office, and they looked inside and saw Myrna was still preoccupied with the computer. And so the killer stepped forward into the room, they raised the rifle, aimed it at Myrna's head, and then pulled the trigger. A .22 caliber bullet lodged in Myrna's brain. She died instantly, slumping over her computer, with her fingers still near the last keys she had pressed. Confident that Myrna was dead, the killer crossed the room and closed the blinds. Then they walked back into the hallway, went down to the kitchen, and sat down at the table, and began to wait. About 20 minutes later, the killer heard Dennis's truck pull up outside. The killer heard the sound of the truck door opening and closing, and then the sounds of footsteps getting louder as Dennis approached the front of the house. At this point, the killer slowly got up and moved towards the back of the kitchen and put their back against the wall, sort of out of view, and continued to wait. A moment later, the killer heard Dennis's footsteps now inside of the house, his keys jangling in his hand. Then the killer saw Dennis walk into the kitchen, and immediately they raised their rifle, aimed it at Dennis's head, and fired. Dennis was dead before he even hit the ground. The killer stared at the body on the floor, and then walked back upstairs and returned the rifle to the closet, failing to notice they were not placing it in the exact spot where it had been before. After that, the killer walked to Dennis and Myrna's bedroom and opened up the dresser drawers to make it look like the home had been robbed. Then the killer opened up the drawer on the nightstand, tore out a check from Dennis's checkbook, and then wrote themselves a $50,000 check and forged Dennis's signature. The killer slipped the check into their pocket, walked back downstairs, left the house, and drove to a Shopko store to buy a hanging plant for an anniversary gift, making sure to keep the receipt to help corroborate the alibi they knew they would need. Dennis and Myrna's own son, Eric Cola, had been their killer. It would turn out Eric had only visited one Shopko store that day to buy a plant, not the two stores like he had told police. And so when detectives obtained the surveillance footage from the Shopko Eric claimed to have visited first, before going to the second one and buying the plant, well, they expected to see him browsing the garden center in this first shop, but the investigators spent hours and hours reviewing the footage from multiple cameras inside and outside the store, but there was no trace of Eric anywhere. And investigators knew that if he had not gone to that store and only went to the second one, well, he would easily have enough time to kill his parents. And so his alibi began to fall apart. And then, when investigators delved deeper into the Cola's financial records, they found that forged $50,000 check, and it was made out to Eric. And then also, when investigators began probing Eric's personal finances, they quickly discovered that Eric had been lying to them. Eric was not raking in $7,000 to $10,000 a month from day trading as he claimed. In fact, he was in serious financial trouble. His day trading had been successful in the beginning, but then the economy had tanked, and Eric's financial position plummeted, leaving him desperately broke and $150,000 in debt. But Eric continued keeping up appearances. He drove luxury cars, spoiled his kids, and retained membership at an exclusive country club. He presented himself to friends as this financial wizard, but all the while, he was actually borrowing huge sums of money from his father and then losing it on the stock market. Investigators had learned from Dennis's colleagues that Dennis was an extraordinarily generous man, the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back if he thought you were in need. But Dennis's generosity had its limits. He had reached the end of his rope with his kids because he had given Eric hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he had helped pay Cindy's mortgage while her husband sat at home unemployed playing video games. And in fact, only days before the murders, Dennis had told a work colleague at the pharmacy that he was officially cutting off his children financially. Enough was enough. When police confronted Eric about the forged $50,000 check, Eric explained that his father had given him a blank check the day before he was killed, and Eric had deposited it on Saturday, having no idea his parents were dead. But police didn't believe that because Dennis had just told his colleague that he planned to stop giving his children money. So police searched Eric's home, and they found the envelopes that matched the envelope from the Fixed You note. Eric had written that note himself and put it in his own mailbox. And so by this point, police were very sure Eric had killed his parents, and they had enough probable cause to arrest him. Police believe Eric Kola murdered his mother and father just so he could use the inheritance money to pull himself out of debt. The case against Eric was entirely circumstantial, but it was strong enough that a jury found him guilty on 2 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. Eric did not receive a dime of his parents' estate, but his 2 children did inherit $740,000, which they split between them. Eric continues to maintain his innocence. Thank you for listening to the Mr. Ballin podcast. If you enjoyed today's stories and you're looking for more strange, dark, and mysterious content, be sure to check out all of our studio's podcasts. They are this.
I drank too much wine that night. But what kind of tourist doesn't have too much wine when they're in Sicily? I was between gigs, wanted to kick back a bit, and so I scored a cheap ticket, booked a quiet hotel on an isolated off-season beach, ate dinner at the hotel's restaurant beachside patio, ordered a bottle of Frappato, and listened to the waves politely patter against the sand. I was the only customer, and the seasoned waiter wasn't there to socialize. After a big plate of sardine pasta, it was 10 p.m., and I was full, jet-lagged, and a bit dizzy from the wine. But it was the perfect cool night for a walk on the beach. So I untied my shoes and took my glass. The beach was long and dark, but I could see well by the 3/4 moon, which reflected its tide-muddied twin off the calm Mediterranean Sea. A few feathery clouds dotted the gray sky. After ambling for a few minutes, I found a big enough piece of twisted driftwood and sat on it. Let my toes sift through the cool sand. Finished the last drops of my wine. And just as I was about to thank the gods for putting me on this peaceful, empty beach, I heard a sound. At first, I thought it was a helicopter in the distance. It was dull but rapid reverberation, like a hand keeping a swift beat on a couch pillow. But then it turned into something else. It turned into something human. She appeared out of the dark, running, in what looked like tactical boots. I thought the wine was making me hallucinate. She was wheezing and waving, panicked, and clearly afraid. I was barefoot, half drunk, 6 time zones off, and not exactly a hero at the best of times. But the mystery woman fell into a pile right in front of me. "What can I do?" I asked stupidly. Her lungs were working overdrive and she couldn't speak. She looked like she could more than handle herself, but I figured someone tried to rob her. I was looking in the direction of the dark beach where she'd appeared, but didn't see anyone or anything. She lay on the sand, heaving great sighs. I stood there like an idiot, holding my empty glass. And just as I was about to spit out a few pathetic words of Italian straight out of my guidebook, she finally caught her breath. And soon she'd tell me, in English, thank God, a story that would haunt my waking hours. She'd tell me the story of the possessed drone. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 35, The Possessed Drone. The woman on the beach looked up to the moonlit sky. She was calmer now, almost like her training had kicked in, because she looked like someone who had been trained. As my eyes adjusted to the dark and the wine, I could see that she was wearing military gear. A full green flight suit, actually dotted with colored patches of her accomplishments. So what the hell was my fellow American doing here on the beach, at night, alone, in Sicily? As she spoke, she rarely made eye contact. She looked around, at the ocean, along the shore in both directions, and up, mostly up, like she was afraid the sky would fall on her. But in between skyward cranes of her neck, Airman Mercy West Daniels told me why she was running. It turned out there was a U.S. Air Force base in Sicily, just a few miles from the hotel, in fact. Mercy had been stationed there for a few months after training at Lackland. She was a military brat. Both her parents served, and she spent her childhood moving from base to base: Missouri, North Carolina, Alaska, Germany. When it was her turn to join up, she chose the Air Force. She wanted to fly. But one slip-up and one stupid test meant she would never get up in a F-15, never be the next great American fighter pilot. But the Air Force could still use her, and use her they did. After finishing basic, Mercy was thrust into unmanned aircraft systems training. She would become a drone operator with a specialty in multi-rotor systems. She learned to operate drones that could hover like mini helicopters. But that's not all they could do. These modern hover drones could quietly surveil and kill. Mercy was trained to do both. Mercy's drone, the VV-0418, was a 15-pound, six-rotor beast the size of a small cat. It was modified from a relatively harmless commercial drone, but Air Force engineers had turned the VV-0418 into a literal killing machine. All the trainees were encouraged to name their drones so they'd feel more connected to them. She named hers Leo. Her top speed was over 120 miles per hour, and she was nimble. Mercy was trained to navigate Leo through tunnels no wider than a shoebox. Leo had nearly 24 hours of continuous flight time, with an additional fueling station hidden in top-secret locations throughout the region and the world. That meant Leo could fly halfway around the planet without returning to base. Her built-in video cameras could observe and collect data on the enemy, almost anywhere they were. To an untrained eye, Leo looked no different from a drone you might buy at the toy aisle at Walmart, albeit with a somewhat sinister metallic sheen. But when Mercy controlled her, Leo could and would shoot to kill. Mercy's first few missions in Sicily were relatively benign. Locate the enemy, observe, and report. The enemy in this case was located in northern Africa across a narrow strip of the Mediterranean Sea. Mercy flew Leo over the water into the southern desert of Tunisia, where intelligence units had tracked a high-priority so-called insurgent hiding in plain sight among a village of date farmers. These few date farming families had survived in dry Sahara conditions for generations by settling near a small, if plentiful, oasis. The oasis-fed palm trees were the main source of income, but they also provided shade for banana trees and for vegetables and grasses to grow. According to the report handed to Mercy, the insurgent she was to monitor was a Libyan from just across the border. The best translation of his moniker was the sand fox, named presumably after a local species. The sand fox had fled into the Tunisian desert after breaking with his guerrilla group. It was believed they were responsible for at least 2 bombings in the city of Saba. The report included a confidence level of a whopping 55%, just above a coin flip. How's that for intelligence? Mercy sat in the control room in Sicily as Leo flew high over the Sahara toward the village where the sand fox had embedded. The control room could be mistaken for a modern man cave. There were 4 virtual cockpits set up in 2 side-by-side pairs. Each cockpit was centered around a comfy leather lounge chair. The chair had cup holders, a tray for food, a couple of keyboards, and a joystick controller. This was all part of the human-machine interface. In other words, it was everything the human needed to control the machine. Mercy, as an operator, had a fancy gaming headset to communicate with Leo and to hear anything coming from the drone-sensitive mics. And she had screens. Man, did she have screens. Maps, topography, heart monitors, telemetry data, aerials. Hell, she even had Netflix. And of course, she had a video screen from Leo's camera and another display for gun sight mode. That's for when Mercy had to aim Leo's microgun, the latest in drone warfare. The microgun shot 2mm bullets known as Colibri, the German word for a hummingbird. The Colibri bullets cut through air at 200 meters per second with sniper precision. Leo could shoot an eyelash off a bumblebee. The control room was an actual man cave in at least one way. It was filled with men. The other 3 operators were all broy bros with more experience than Mercy. They'd all been on base for at least a year and loved to slap each other 5 when they made a kill. She called them Huey, Dewey, and Louie. All day and night for 2 weeks, Mercy observed the farming village through Leo. During the day, Leo hovered high above, recording the movement of everyone in the village. At night, Leo sank down and hovered among the leaves of the date trees. The sound of her rotors was undetectable on windy nights and could be mistaken for an insect on calm evenings. Mercy found the primary target on the second day. The sandfox's real name was Saad. He looked older than his 34 years. His beard was severed by scars. This was the man responsible for the bombings. For days, she had Leo follow him. She was supposed to find evidence of his activities and patterns in his movement, and he did show a pattern. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., Saad prayed. At 6 a.m., he cultivated a garden fed by the oasis. At 9 a.m., he had tea with an old blind man in the village. And late in the afternoon, after a long day of growing and harvesting, Saad returned to his modest brick home, to his beloved and pregnant wife. At the end of the second week, Mercy got the order. It was one of the senior operators, the one she called Huey, who brought it to her cockpit. "Time to take out the sandfox," he said. She had been taught never to attach herself in any way to her targets, but with the sandfox, she couldn't help it. Every night, after a long day of work, Saad brought 2 flowers home. And it's not like flowers were in surplus here in the Sahara. He had to seek them out. And every night, Leo recorded Saad as he handed his wife the purple desert flower, and then he would kiss her belly and give the second flower to his baby-to-be. Saad did not show any sign of being the insurgents the intelligence reports stated he had a 55% chance of being. It seemed to Mercy that he'd made a life in this peaceful farming village. But her job was her job, and a target was a target. Late one night, just after 2 a.m., Leo hovered just outside the only window of Saad's home. Mercy watched as Saad and his wife slept. It was dark, and she had to rely on the thermal camera. She watched their globby red bodies breathe in and out. Huey, Dewey, and Louie made sure to stay up with her even though technically they were off that night. They wanted to see Mercy break her cherry and make her first kill. She saw one amorphous red glob, the wife's, get up and exit the house. At this hour, surely going to the outhouse for a pee. "Now's your chance, airman," said one of the bros looking over her shoulder, probably Louie. Mercy took aim at the remaining red glob, Saad, the sandfox, only 15 feet away from the hovering Leo, and he had no idea. For Mercy, it was like throwing a tennis ball at the ground. She couldn't miss, but she hesitated. All she'd seen of this target, this man, was that he loved his wife and had a baby on the way. "Do it, Mercy," said Dewey. "That's an order," said Huey. "Take the shot," said Louie. She pulled the trigger, and not even a moment later, Leo fired 3 micro bullets. The glob sat up immediately, and then fell down to the floor, wailing and thrashing in pain for a moment, before going still. "Hell yeah," said one of the ooies, but Mercy wasn't paying attention to them. She was stunned. All the training didn't fully prepare her for taking a human life, even from afar. maybe especially from afar since it denied the target even the chance to look his killer in the eyes. It felt cowardly to kill from such a distance, even with the 55% chance this was a murderous insurgent she had shot. She guided Leo inside the hut to confirm the kill. Leo's rotors turned as the insect-like drone flew closer to the red glob. With the shots already taken, Mercy was no longer in quiet surveillance mode. She turned on a small directional LED to see better, but what she saw wasn't good. She saw the wife, dead on the floor, holding her belly and leaking blood out of her chest and stomach. Mercy's motion detector went off on another screen. Someone else had entered the room. On her video screen, she could see Saad in the doorway, staring at his dead wife. "Take him down," said Louis. But Mercy was frozen. She had Saad dead in her sights, but she couldn't move her wrist. "Shoot," said Huey. Before she could, Saad reached out for Leo. He didn't appear angry or violent. He spoke some words in a Berber language. Mercy couldn't understand them, but to her they felt like a chant or a prayer. She came out of her own stupor when one of her alert systems told her that Saad had his hand on the drone. She pulled back and took aim. "Now, airman," said Dewey. She pulled the trigger. No questions this time. The sandfox took a shot to the forehead, and any prayer on his lips was stopped then and there. He slumped down to the floor next to his wife. Mercy could see she had the day's purple desert flowers pinned to her nightgown. After all her training with Leo, Mercy could only describe her connection with the drone as telepathic. At times she felt like she and Leo were twin siblings who often knew what the other was thinking. And after making the kill on Saad, Mercy felt that connection break. She'd completed the mission. The sandfox was dead. But now Leo was acting funny. As other villagers approached the house and found the dead lovers, Mercy took Leo high into the air and guided her home. Except she wasn't responding well. Usually if Mercy wanted Leo to do something, almost anything, it would almost magically happen. A slight quarter-degree turn? No prob. Hover invisibly in the corner of a room? Easy. Now she was supposed to be coming back to base, but was doing so unexpectedly fast. There was no rush. The mission was complete. No angry day farmer could keep up with a drone, nor cross the Mediterranean Sea back to Sicily. No sense draining Leo's fuel cells. Come back nice and easy. Mercy slowed Leo down over and over, but each time she picked up speed again. She was pushing 100 and still accelerating. She didn't want to let the bros know that Leo was acting funny. Besides, Huey, Dewey, and Louie were already half drunk, celebrating her big night with a 6-pack each. They pointed a beer at her and she took it. Screw it. She'd broken her kill cherry, after all. She could inspect her drone when it reached the base. She put Leo on autopilot and proceeded to party. Mercy woke up a few hours later in her cockpit lounge chair. She was still buzzing from a long night of drinking and celebrating. After a couple Miller Lights, she'd gone from dazed by the act of killing to reveling in her accomplishment. After all, Huey, Dewey, and Louie were proud of her. She got texts of congratulations from her instructors back at Lackland. Everyone was saying she did well, so she decided that was the case. She wiped a blob of morning spittle from her cheek and some chips from her flight suit. She looked around and saw that Huey and Dewey were still passed out at their own stations across the room. The door opened and Louie walked in, a bit unsteady on his feet. She said good morning. He took a half-empty can and chugged. Yuck, Mercy thought. She sat back at her station to check on Leo. She was just a few miles from base and still moving strangely fast. Mercy grabbed the joystick and tried to slow her down, but it didn't work. She called Louie over and told him what was going on. Probably just a little short in her system, he said. Don't bother me with questions like this early, okay? He sat down in his chair and closed his eyes. Even in her hungover state, Mercy was concerned. She and Leo had never been anything but perfectly in sync. Now Leo seemed to be controlling herself. She checked her trajectory. Returning drones always landed at the heliport to prevent collisions. and because that's where the fueling stations were. But Leo's trajectory was off. She wasn't heading to the helipad. She was heading to the control room. She was heading to Mercy. Mercy walked over to Louis and tried to rouse him. What? He said without moving. Let me be. Before she could reply to that idiot, Mercy heard an unmistakable sound. Rotors. The room had no windows. Mercy leaned over and followed the sound, along one wall, and then around to another. The other 3 operators had been roused by Mercy's movement, and they were now all watching her and exchanging what the hell faces. As Mercy and the sound moved towards the door, they all stood, hands on hips, waiting for something to happen. For a few seconds, the rotor sound stayed just outside the door, stationary, patient. Mercy backed away. And then something happened. The door exploded inward, the handle shot apart by a dozen microbullets. As the dust cleared, all Mercy saw was an empty doorway. But then her drone came floating in. "This isn't funny, Mercy," one of the bros said. "Yeah, shut her down," said another. The drone turned, scanning the room, and then let out 3 shots in quick succession, each one to the forehead of Huey, Dewey, and Louie. They died without awareness or regret. Mercy glanced quickly at the floor, which was now covered with the corpses of her colleagues. Then she turned back to the drone above her. "Leo," she said. She circled Mercy, the camera always facing her operator. "Leo, who is controlling you?" Mercy asked. The drone lunged in her direction. Mercy held her hands up. Leo came even closer, now just inches from Mercy's sweat-covered face, her rotors like a tiger's growl. "Who is controlling you?" Mercy repeated. Leo spun and shot wildly around the room. Screens exploded on all sides. Mercy ducked in cover from the glass. Metal dangled from broken equipment. Sparks lit up dark corners. Mercy slowly rose, and Leo returned to monitoring her. "Leo, why are you doing this? Were you hacked?" Mercy asked desperately. Leo turned to face Mercy's station. Her screens were still intact and functioning. She saw pixels form on the black center screen. They soon assembled into a shape she recognized. The pixelated face of the sandfox. "Saad?" Mercy said. "Saad is dead." The pixelated head shook back and forth. "Nuh-uh," it was saying. "Saad is alive?" The face nodded. "You're the sandfox?" Mercy asked. The head shook again. "No." Then the screen showed words. "I am the purple desert rose." "Who controls you?" Mercy asked again. The words on the screen changed. "I control myself, and now you are observed. Always observed." Those words repeated. Always observed. Always observed. Always observed. Mercy did the only thing she could think of. She ran. Mercy ran, and everywhere she ran, the drone followed. She heard the rotor always high above. Leo followed her out of the control room, off base, and eventually onto the beach, where she met a drunk-on-wine rider trying to enjoy a quiet moonlit walk. She told me her story, and I knew then why she was always looking up. She told me that Saad, was hovering up above us right now, hiding in those feathery clouds. I looked up, but she grabbed my arm. "Don't look," she said. Listen. I told her I didn't hear anything except the wind. "That's it," she told me. "That's her." And when the drone's fuel cells ran low, Leo would just recharge again and return to Mercy. She'd never be alone again. Always observed. Always observed. I didn't know what else to do, so I offered to go with her to the local constable. But she refused. She said Leo would know if she tried to go to an authority. Leo wouldn't allow it. Instead, Mercy just walked off. I watched her continue down the beach. She stared at the sky as she disappeared into the dark night. I never saw her again. But you know writers, never let a good story go to waste. I checked the local papers for a story about the deaths of 3 American airmen. Nothing. I Googled around for it over the next few days. Still nothing. When I got back to the U.S., I put in open records requests for information on an incident at Air Station Sigonella on the island of Sicily. Weeks later, I got a letter from the Air Force. They could neither confirm nor deny that any such incident occurred. Typical U.S. government, they think open means open when advantageous. I tried again, this time requesting the personnel file of one Airman Mercy West Daniels. The letter I got in response said that the U.S. Air Force had never employed nor had any relationship with someone of that name. For a couple of years, I wondered if it was all a drunk illusion, if I'd been hypnotized by the wine and the perfect cool breeze on the beach. I told anyone who would listen about Airman Mercy, Leo, and the Sand Fox. Cool story, they'd say, and then move on. Until one day, I told a friend of a friend at a party. Instead of looking away, he looked me right in the eye. He showed me his common access card, told me he was a drone operator on home leave from Germany. Said every trainee knew about Leo. I asked him if he thought it was true, that a man's soul had taken over a drone after his wife had been killed. He said he believed it. He said I'd be foolish not to believe the story of the possessed drone. And he said that since I'd been on the beach with Mercy that night, that the drone knew my face. And if I ever heard the sound of rotors over my head, that would be the last sound I ever heard. Run!
by for some target practice. Real thing's coming soon. Enemy soldier incoming. Playtime's over. Stand by for deployment to the war zone. Resurgence. Survive and your team can redeploy. Eliminate targets to bring them back faster. Track is available. Check your tac map for objective location. XP multiplier deployed. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Remaining operators from that squad. Hunt them down. Swarm of spy drones down there. Clean them up. Another squad's engaging those drones. Expect contact. Destroyed. Use your tac map to hunt down the rest of them. Yeah. Squad, go down that swarm before we did. Confirmed, and we located the rest of them. Your squad mates redeploying. Well done. Moving! Orders are to hack contracts and secure cash payments. Hack is confirmed online. Now go snag another contract. Your squad mates back on station. Losing ground. Move it. Time for vengeance. You're redeploying. Got reinforcements inbound. You have a buy station inbound. Your squad made it to the safe zone. Deployable buy station. Contract time's limited. Activate hack. You've hacked all the contracts in the AO. Task complete. back on station. Go get after it. You got reinforcements inbound.
Took a round! Marked an SMG.
Friendly precision airstrike inbound.
Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies.
Hostile airstrike near your location.
Gas is moving. Marking the rest of that squad on your attack map. Go get hunting. Some of your squad's outside the safe zone. Your squad mate's back on station. Good work. There are 24 enemies active. Kill them all. Stand by for redeployment. Fire sale active. Buy station prices have been reduced. You've got reinforcements inbound.
Need to heal up! Line is
Located the rest of them. Resurgence window is ending. Watch your six. Your squad mates redeploying. Well done. Squad mates back on station. Good work. Gas is closing in. No hits on target. Enemies dropping into the AO. Fire sale's over. Adjusting prices.
Hostiles deployed a mosquito.
You got reinforcements inbound.
Contract.
surging. Go get your revenge. One supply box down. 2 remain. 2 supply boxes secured. 1 remaining. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Gas is inbound.
I don't usually feel the need to say so.
Be advised, you still have squad mates outside the safe zone. time's over. Now you deploy to the war zone. Resurgence. Stay alive to keep your squad in the fight. Contract. Objectives marked on your TAC map. Moving.
Our counter UAV is active.
Identity confirmed.
Heads up, we got enemy operators hunting for explosive nuclear materials in the area.
Here. Contract here. Got a contract.
Hack any contracts you find and divert those payments.
Scratch that.
Got gas moving in.
Hostile mosquitoid online.
You're getting another chance. Make it count. Down to you, soldier. Stay sharp. Your squad mates redeploying. Well done. Your squad mates back on station. Good work. Hack is activated. Now find additional contracts.
Moving here.
Loadout drop headed your way. You got reinforcements inbound. Down. Marking the rest of them. Drop points marked. Double XP deployed. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Resurgence inbound.
Contract here.
Fire sale is active. Buy station prices are adjusted. Positive ID on the bounty targets. Hunt them down. Operators from that squad. Hunt them down. All bounty targets destroyed. Hell of a job. Enemy soldier incoming. Kill confirmed, and we located the rest of them. Resurgence is about to end. Make it count. Gas is inbound. Squad members are in the safe zone. Target down. Mark the red zone. Normal. Only 25 left. Keep up the good work.
People with nothing to hide don't usually feel the need to say so.
Enemies dropping into the AO. Resurgence has been deactivated. This is the end game.
Good to go.
Hostile bomb drone is active. Strike near.
Enemy down.
People with nothing to hide don't usually feel the need to say
Need to heal up. Thermite incoming.
Move it. Enemies located a bomb component. Don't let them secure more.
Ammo here. Tactical out.
Closing in.
Taking effective fire.
All right, your squad's in the safe zone. Less than 25, we're still standing. We lost that one, but we'll get those sumbitches next time.
Fuck yeah, you're an awesome motherfucker. Thanks for the follow, bro.
treeing.
Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Check your weapons, check your gear. We're holding for deployment. Enemies dropping into the AO. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies.
Stop looking.
Enemy soldier incoming. All stations, we are green to go. Stand by for deployment. Resurgence. Survive to redeploy fallen teammates. Kill to bring high priority contract. Check your attack map for objective location. Alright, we got you started. You finished the job. Avoid the contracts and reroute those cash payments. Contract is hacked. Secure the next target.
Solid copy. Counter UAV running signals interference.
We're clear. All available contracts are hacked.
Friendly airstrike in the AO.
Counter UAV.
inbound. Your squad mates redeploying. Well done. Kill. Marking the rest of that squad on your TAC map. Get hunting. You got reinforcements inbound. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Gas is moving. All squad members are in the safe zone.
People with nothing to hide don't usually feel the need to do it.
Confirmed.
Drop their
We
sniper!
located the rest of them.
Fire! Check fire!
Enemies dropping into the AO. Fire sale active. Buy station prices have been reduced.
Hostile mosquito is online.
Bounty targets identified. Weapons free.
Got eyes on a weapon.
Requesting recon at my location! Requesting recon flyover! Requesting recon at my location!
Friendly buy station inbound. Location marked.
Requesting recon flyover!
Get ready. Resurgence window is about to close.
Requesting recon at my location!
Deployable buy station is
Requesting
available.
recon flyover!
Friendly UAV entering
Target
area.
marked!
Longbow 3-1 is on station. Strike inbound.
Friendly mortar strike on the way.
Gas is inbound. Your squad mates back on station. Some of your squads outside the safe zone. Sale's over. Adjusting prices.
Advanced UAV is bingo fuel. RTB at this time.
Planting cluster mine!
Your squad mates redeploying. Well done.
Enemy precision airstrike. Find cover.
Be advised, resurgence is no longer active. This is for keeps. Top 5, well done.
Hold on, I got you!
Our advanced UAV is online.
Friendly UAV entering area.
Attack me!
You're losing ground. Move it. Move to the safe zone. We lost that sumbitch. Bounty contract's been pulled.
Hold tight, you'll make it!
You got gas moving in. Get to the safe zone.
Be advised.
Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. 10 remaining. Keep pushing. Gas is inbound. The safe zone is far from your location. Get moving. Pronto.
That could have been bad!
You made it to the top 5. We're still standing. That victory's ours next time. It's a valiant effort. Keep your head up. Return to base for debrief.
No?
Mission complete, but I'm tracking more threats en route. Prioritize extraction.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can. Yeah, you just gotta be in the lobby.
Gear up fast. We're about to get evil. Enemy soldier incoming.
Enemy movement in the AO.
All stations, green light. We are deploying to the war zone.
Running, Morty. Don't What?
Resurgence. Stay alive to keep your
What do you
squad
mean?
in the fight.
Oh, really?
High priority contract. Objectives marked on your TAC map.
Infinity in your mom's butt. Oh, I almost grabbed it. Let's go. Ándale, rápido.
Friendly mosquito deployed. Hostile deployed a mosquito.
Squad mates redeploying. Enemy destroyed. Use your TAC map to hunt down the rest of them. Drops on the way. Your TAC map.
No. I haven't had one, I swear. I want one now. I caught the one before I died.
Time for vengeance. You're redeploying. Gas is closing in. Good work. You've got reinforcements inbound.
Oh, you got me down. Gee, camping up here. Oh,
Guys,
you're a fool.
safe zone.
Solid copy.
Get another chance. Make it count.
People with nothing to hide don't usually feel the
Your teammate still died. They're gonna die.
Hostiles deploy the mosquito.
Enemy movement.
Hostile mosquito is online.
Go get after it. Squad mates are deploying. Well done. Enemy UAV overhead. Squad mates back on station.
Comes
Good
around!
work. Mark remaining operators from that squad. Hunt them down.
Friendly precision airstrike inbound.
Friendly Guardian is active. Enemies dropping into the AO. Confirmed, and we located the rest of them.
Stop of green.
Gas is moving. Our Guardians lost power. Get your squad to the safe zone. No one gets left behind. You got
Gotta fire.
reinforcements inbound.
We only need a grand.
Enemy marked. People with nothing to hide don't usually feel the need to stay though.
Mortar support incoming!
Solid copy. Mortar strike on the way.
Fire sale is active. Buy station prices are adjusted. Loadout drop headed your way.
Impact. No hit. Friendly mortar strike inbound.
Camping, camping, camping. You're nothing but a camper.
Resurgence is about to end. Make it count. Get ready. You're redeploying.
Stick around!
Right in front of us.
You're losing ground. Move.
In the AO.
Be advised, you still have squad mates outside the safe zone.
Now, what? There's a dude behind me. Hold on. Damn it!
Resurgence has been deactivated. The end game. Stand by for redeployment. Got gas moving in. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies.
How do you know that? You weren't listening.
Get back up there,
How'd he know to turn around though? Was my question.
Enemy here.
You made it to the top
You're up
10.
there, sniper.
Taking fire!
Yeah, I'll run on like 2 more and then I'm probably gonna hop off. Get my meds and listen to some music. And eat some homemade hamburger helper. I'm a fat ass when I'm high. Yeah, we used 2 boxes of noodles, so we had a little bit left over.
We're headed to the war zone. Get geared up and stand by. Enemies dropping into
My
the
wife,
AO.
my ex, and the 4 kids. Well, 3 kids. One kid's on breast milk.
All stations, this is Shadow 01. Deployment to the war zone has been authorized.
Go for the key card or just the drop it file? Alright. Gotcha.
Resurgence. Surviving your team can redeploy. Eliminate targets to bring them back faster. Think we got their attention with that one. Move in.
Everybody in the mom? Night. You are
Hostile counter UAV
Goodbye.
overhead. Enemies deploy the counter UAV.
No, that was my fault. That was my fault.
Friendly loadout drops on the way. Be advised, enemies deployed a buy station.
There's people here.
Gas is closing in.
Airstrike. Find cover.
Longbow 3-1, target of ground. Strike inbound.
Good kill. Mark the
I killed one. He had the first couple shots on me.
Hostiles deploy the mosquito.
We are returning you to the front. Earn this.
Hostile mortar strike in the area.
Your squad mate's back on station. Good work. Got a loadout drop inbound.
This dude's cheating. Oh, this is cheating. You fucking aimed right at me. Get out of here, bro. This might be my last one.
Resurging. Go get your revenge.
guy over there, the guy over there, Muffin 3. Can I watch?
Bounty targets are up. Get after them.
Watch out.
Enemy soldier incoming. We located the rest of them. Gas is moving.
Marking shotgun shell.
Squad mates redeploying. Well done.
Hostile counter UAV overhead.
Your squad made it to the safe zone. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies.
Enemies deployed a counter UAV.
Me add y'all, so y'all see me on, we could play. Alright, there you go. It was nice playing with you guys. We came close to a couple wins. But I'm gonna take my medicine and chill out for the night. Yeah, we'll get one tomorrow though. It's in the cards. Ugh. As good as we were playing tonight, we're due for one. Alright, y'all. Y'all have a wonderful night. Alrighty, stream. That is going to do it for me. Appreciate the love from everybody. Mr. Butter Brown, Mr. King, well, PRL King. Thank you guys for stopping by. Thank you for the follows. And that is going to be it for me. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow.